Good day, everyone. For today's session, I will be discussing the research instrument and consent forms. But before that, let me introduce myself to you. I am Eunika Zurbano, Teacher 3 of Tansan National Trade School. At the end of this session, the participants are expected to learn about research instruments and consent forms. In basic research, specifically, the participants are expected to letter A, define research instrument. B. Determine the means of classifying data collection instruments. C. Identify types of research instruments commonly used in basic research. D. Determine the criteria for measuring research instruments. And lastly, letter E. Differentiate kinds of consent forms. Before we discuss research instruments, let us define first data. What is data? It refers to the kinds of information researchers obtain on the subjects of their research. So these are the examples of data that we are usually using in research. First, demographic profile, such as age, sex, religion, etc. Scores from researcher-made tests, responses from oral interview, and written answers to survey questionnaires. Before making an investigation or research, an important decision for every researcher must be made. During the planning, the researcher must ask the following questions to himself. First, what kind of data am I going to collect? Second, what device am I going to use in collecting the data? These devices, such as pen and paper tests, questionnaires, or rating scale, are what we call instruments. But please take note that most, but not all, research requires the use of an instrument. In studies where the data are obtained exclusively from existing records, such as grades, attendance, etc., no instrument is needed. The whole process of preparing to collect data is what we call instrumentation. It involves not only the selection or design of the instruments, but also the procedures and the conditions under which the instruments will be administered. So there are several questions to ask before developing a research instrument. First is, where will the data be collected? This question refers to the location of the data collection. Where will it be? In a classroom, a schoolyard, a private home, or on the street? Second, when will the data be collected? This question refers to the time of collection. When is it to take place? In the morning, afternoon, evening, or over the weekend? Third, how often are the data to be collected? This question refers to the frequency of collection. How many times are the data to be collected? Only once, twice, or more than twice? Fourth, who is to collect the data? This question refers to the administration of the instruments. Who is to do this? The researcher or someone selected and trained by the researcher? These questions are important because it can affect the data to be obtained. The researcher must not only select or develop a good instrument, because the data provided by any instrument may be affected by any or all of the preceding considerations. Instruments can be classified in a number of ways. Here are some of the most useful. In educational research, three general methods are available for obtaining information. The researcher can get the information from number one, the researcher themselves, or with the little or no involvement of other people. So for example, a researcher interested in learning and memory development counts the number of times it takes different kinder pupils to learn navigate their way correctly through a maze in a school playground. So since these subjects are very young, the researcher used a tally sheet as an instrument in obtaining the data instead of asking directly his subjects, which are the kinder pupils. Second, the researcher can get the information directly from the subject of the study. So this is what we are usually doing. So for example, a researcher in an elementary school administers a weekly spelling test that requires students to spell correctly the new words learned in class during the week. So since the data were obtained directly from the subjects, then the spelling test used by the teacher or the researcher is a subject instrument. Third, the information can be gathered from others or frequently referred to as informants who are knowledgeable about the subjects. For example, a researcher asks the teachers to use a rating scale to rate each of their students on their phonic reading skills instead of administering a test for the students. So, the informant in this instrument are the teachers with the use of a rating scale. Another means of classifying data collection instruments is where did the instrument come from. There are essentially three basic ways for a researcher to acquire an instrument. First is to adapt or find and administer a previously existing instrument or sometimes a standardized test or questionnaire wherein no modification was made. Next is to adapt or modify then administer an instrument that was developed by someone else. Please take note that if you're going to use or modify an existing instrument made by other researchers, you must ask for his or her permission first before using it. Lastly, is to develop your own research instrument. Among the three options, developing your own research instrument is the least preferred since it is time-consuming, while adapting an instrument is the most preferred since the instruments were developed by experts who possess the necessary skills, and choosing an instrument that has been developed takes far less than developing a new instrument. Another way to classify instruments is in terms of whether they are written or marked response from subjects or a more general evaluation of subjects' performance. So written response instruments include objective tests such as multiple choice, true or false, matching type, or short answer. Also, it includes short essay examinations, questionnaires, interview schedules, rating scales, and checklists. While performance instruments include any device designed to measure either a procedure or a product. Procedures are way of doing things, such as writing a letter or solving a puzzle, while products are the end result of procedures. Performance instruments are designed to see whether and how well procedures can be followed and to assess the quality of products. So these are the types of research instrument. They are divided into two, research completed and subject completed. Under research completed, rating scales, interview schedules, observation forms, tally sheets, flowcharts, performance checklist, anecdotal records, time and motion logs. While under subject completed, these are the questionnaires, self-checklists, attitude scales, personality inventories, achievement or aptitude tests, performance tests, projective devices, and social metric devices. So we are not going to discuss all these types of research instruments, but we are just going to focus on the most commonly used instruments in doing basic research. The first one is rating scale. A rating scale is a measured judgment of some sort or it involves qualitative description of a limited number of aspects of a thing or traits of a person. So these are the commonly used forms of rating scale in educational research. First is the Thurstone technique. It is defined as a unidimensional scale that is used to track respondents' behavior, attitude, or feeling towards a subject. So for example, is to understand the attitude of employees in an organization towards diversity hiring in that organization. So, the only options in the questions are agree and disagree. Next is the Likert method. A Likert scale is a rating scale often found on survey forms that measures how people feeling about something. It is named after Rensis Likert, the social psychologist who invented the use of scale points in this type of rating system. So for example, in agreement, the options are strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, strongly disagree. For frequency, the options or the scales are always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. In terms of quality, the scales are excellent, good, fair, poor, and very poor. Lastly, semantic differential scale is a survey or questionnaire rating scale that asks people to rate a product, company, brand, or any entity within the frames of a multi-point rating option. These survey answering options are grammatically on opposite adjectives at each end. Charles Egerton Osgood, a famous American psychologist, invented the semantic differential scale so that this emotional attitude towards entities can be recorded and put to good use. So these are the following examples of rating scale. For the Thurstone scale, you are just going to check the statements with which you agree. So in this case, there are only two options. It is either you agree or disagree. For the Likert method, it has several scales such as strongly agree, agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. While for the semantic differential, the end choices are very easy and very difficult, but in between these choices are multiple points that you can select to determine how you feel. Next is interview. It is in a sense of an oral questionnaire. Instead of writing the response, the interviewee gives the needed information orally and face-to-face. With a skillful interviewer, the interview is often superior to other data gathering device. The purpose of interview are to verify information gathered from written sources, to clarify points, and to update information and to collect data. The advantage of this instrument are that the interviewer can clarify any questions that are obscure and also can ask the respondents to expand on answers that are particularly important or revealing. So there are different types of interview that a researcher can be made. First is structured or standardized interview. It is when all the questions are prepared in advance, which is in contrast to number two, the unstructured interview or unstandardized interview, in which there is no specific set of predetermined questions, and the interviewer is able to change the questions at any time and ask follow-up questions to the interviewee's responses. On the other hand, telephone interview is a data collection method where the interviewer communicates with the respondents on the telephone in accordance with the prepared questionnaire. Usually, standardized questionnaires with close-ended questions are recommended in this kind of questioning. In this pandemic, the researcher may opt to do telephone interview since no physical contact is involved. The third one is observation. Observation is perceiving data through the senses, such as sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. It is most direct way used in studying individual behavior. So this is an example of observation form. Initially, observation form should always be used on a trial basis in situations similar to those to be observed in order to work out any bugs or ambiguities. A frequent weakness in many observation forms is that they ask the observer to record more behaviors that can be done accurately, or to watch too many individuals at the same time. As it is frequently the case, the simpler the instrument, the better. Next is the tally sheets. A tally sheet is a device often used by the researchers to record the frequency of students' behavior, activities, or remarks. For example, how many high school students follow instructions during the fire drills? How many instances of aggression or helpfulness do elementary students exhibit on the playground? Next is anecdotal records, another way of recording the behavior of individuals. There is also no set format. Rather, observers are free to record any behavior they think is important and need not focus on the same behavior for all subjects. In doing anecdotal records, there are four common types of anecdotes. The first three types are to be avoided and the last one must be followed. So what are those? So the first one is evaluative. It is to evaluate or judge the behavior of the child as good or bad, desirable or undesirable. For example, you wrote, Julius talked loud and much during poetry. He showed a bad attitude. So this is an example of an evaluative anecdote because you judge the behavior of the children, whether it is good or bad. The second type of anecdotes that we must avoid is the interpretative anecdote. It is account for or explain child's behavior using only single fact. Example, Anna was excited to submit her project, maybe because she did not sleep just to finish it. So you interpret the behavior of the children using a single fact, which is wrong. The third one, and must be avoided, is generalized anecdotes. It describes certain behavior in general terms as happening frequently or as characterizing the child. For example, Gary is awful restless these days. During the discussion, he is interested, but his arms are moving out or he is punching the one sitting next to him. So just because his arms are moving, you generalize that he is punching the one sitting next to him. So that type of anecdote must be avoided. The last type of anecdote, but the one that you must follow, is specific anecdote. It tells exactly what the child did or said that describe concretely the situation in which the action or comment occurred, and then tell clearly what the other persons also did. So you must clearly specify every words or actions the children did or said, or the direct conversation of the children must be written on your anecdotal record. Next is time and motion logs. So it is a very detailed observation of an individual or a group. Observer tries to record everything an individual does as objectively as possible and brief. So in our example, on the first column is the time, and on the second column are the activities did by the person. Next is the questionnaire, the most common instrument or tool of research for obtaining the data beyond the physical reach of the observer, which, for example, may be sent to human beings who are thousands of miles away or just around the corner. So the advantages of questionnaires are they can be mailed or given to large number of people at the same time. While the disadvantages are that unclear or seemingly ambiguous questions cannot be clarified, and the respondents has no chance to expand or react verbally to a question of particular interest or importance. Lastly is the checklist. It is the simplest of the devices, consists of a prepared list of items. The presence or absence of the item may be indicated by inserting the appropriate word or number. It is used in descriptive and historical researches. After creating a research instrument, we must determine whether it is a good research instrument or not. That is why we have the criteria for measuring research instruments. The first one is validity. It refers to the appropriateness, correctness, meaningfulness, and usefulness of the specific inferences researchers make based on the data they collect. So validation is the process of collecting and analyzing evidences to support such inferences. Validity is an important key to effective research. If a piece of research is invalid, then it is worthless. Validity is thus a requirement for both quantitative and qualitative research. So there are several types of validity, but we are going to discuss only the main types of validity. The researcher must know what kind of evidences he or she might collect. Essentially, there are three main types. The first one is content validity. It refers to the content and format of the instrument. The content and format must be consistent with the definition of the variable and the sample of subjects to be measured. So, for example, you are interested in the effects of a new math intervention to address the difficulty in problem solving of grade 8 students. So, to assess the students, you plan to give them math tests containing word problems. Of course, the researcher expects the students who undergone the intervention program will be able to solve different types of word problems correctly. So, the researcher will give them a math test containing such problems. If the instrument provides an adequate sample of types of word problems covered in the intervention, then the instrument will provide valid evidence on the improved problem-solving skills of the students. If only easy problems are included on the test, or only very difficult problems involving, or only one problem involving subtraction, for example, the test will be unrepresentative and hence not provide information from which valid inferences can be made. Next is criterion-related evidence of validity. It refers to the relationship between scores obtained using the instrument and scores obtained using one or more other instruments or measures, or often called a criterion. For example, if an instrument has been designed to measure the academic ability, the student's scores with the instrument might be compared with their grade point averages or the external criterion. So if the instrument does indeed measure academic ability, then the students who score high on the test would also be expected to have high grade point averages. Lastly is construct-related evidence of validity or construct validity. It refers to the nature of psychological construct or characteristics being measured by the instrument. It is the broadest of the three categories of evidences for validity that we are considering. So there is no single piece of evidence that satisfies construct-related validity. Rather, researchers attempt to collect a variety of different types of evidences, so the more varied are better. That will allow them to make warranted inference. So the second criteria for measuring research instrument is reliability. So what is reliability? It refers to the consistency of scores obtained, and also it means stability and maintaining consistent measurement in a test administered twice. It also refers to how consistent they are for each individual from one administration of an instrument to another and from one set of instruments to another. For example, a test designed to measure typing ability. If the test is reliable, we would expect a student who receives a high score for the first time, he takes the test to receive a high score the next time he takes the test. The scores would probably not be identical, but they should be close. So there are different methods in determining the reliability of a test. The first one is the test-retest method. It involves administering the same test twice to the same group after a certain time interval has elapsed. A reliability coefficient is then calculated to indicate the relationship between the two sets of scores obtained. The next one is equivalent forms method. When the equivalent forms method is used, two different but equivalent or also called alternate or parallel forms of an instrument are administered to the same group of individuals during the same time period. Although the questions are different, they should sample the same content and they should be constructed separately from each other. A reliability coefficient is then calculated between the two sets of scores obtained. A high coefficient would indicate strong evidence of the reliability that the two forms are measuring the same thing. Lastly is the internal consistency methods. It can be a split hub procedure or Goddard-Richardson approaches. For split hub procedure, it involves scoring two halves, usually odd items versus even items of a test separately for each person and then calculating a correlation coefficient for the two sets. The coefficient indicates the degree to which the two halves of the test provides the same result and hence describe the internal consistency of the test. Perhaps the most frequently employed method for determining internal consistency is the Coder-Richardson approach. The formula requires only three pieces of information: the number of items of the test, the mean, and the standard deviation. Please take note that however, that formula can be only used if it can be assumed that the items are of equal difficulty. So here are some reasons why we should conduct a field test or dry run. First, to determine the feasibility and applicability of the study. Second, to ensure that the data to be collected are valid, reliable, and accurate. Third, to ensure efficiency and effectiveness of instrument in gathering the data needed. Lastly, to ensure that the instrument, say for example, the questionnaire is objective, simple, meaningful, easily administered, and adequate in collecting the needed data. So my last topic is the different types of consent forms. These forms were pre-filled already and can be copied from the Division Memorandum Number 236 Series of 2019 Local Issuance. So we have three types of consent forms that we may use depending on the subject of our study. We may use all or only one of them. But the first one is informed consent. Informed consent are intended for participants 18 years old and above. Usually, these are the teaching and non-teaching staff, parents, or stockholders that are part of your study. So this is the example of informed consent provided by the division. The second one is Ascent for minors. This type of consent form is for respondents below 18 years old. So these are usually our students if they are the respondents or participants of your study. So this is the Assent for Minors template provided by the division. Lastly is the parental consent. These are for the parents or guardians of the respondents under 18 years old. Both assent for minors and parental consent must be used if the participants of the study are minors. So why use consent forms? It is because of the Republic Act number 10173 or Data Privacy Act of 2012. So it is an act protecting individual personal information in information and communication system in the government and the private sector, creating for this purpose a National Privacy Commission and for the purposes. Therefore, any information that we may gather from our respondents of the study must not be disclosed to other people. It should not also affect the grade or current status of the children on whatever the outcome of the study. So that ends my discussion, and I hope that you learned something from this session. So these are the references that I use in these slides, and thank you for listening.